At the age of 24, I find myself starting my first serious job. Now, I'd had a few terrible jobs in the past, I'm sure we all have, right? But this was going to be my first serious, proper job. I was going to work as a political interviewer, interviewing presidents, prime ministers, important politicians from around the world, all for a British newspaper, The Times. Sounds great. Well, after a week of training, for want of a better term, imagine my surprise when I was told the first thing I was going to be doing is traveling to Lima in Peru to interview this man, Alberto Fujimori, the president. Now, I felt a certain sense of panic, to be honest with you. After all, what did I know about Peru? I find myself on the plane, leaving London and flying towards Lima. Whilst there, on the plane, I'm watching that little icon of the aircraft flying over the Atlantic. At first, it felt like there was such a long way to go. But as I got closer and closer, the nerves really started to build up. I realized I don't know anything about Peru. My Spanish was not very good. I'd never interviewed anyone, much less a president before. This was going to be tough. Thank God I didn't realize how tough, because I was going to have the worst meeting of my entire life. I've certainly never had that experience ever again. But I didn't know that then, thank goodness. So I found myself reading the Economist Intelligence Report. I was devouring as much information as I possibly could about Peru, about the president, and I was preparing my questions as best I could. When I arrived at Lima, I was met by a car, a chauffeur, that took me to the hotel where I was able to have a very quick shower before being whisked to the presidential palace for the interview itself. Now, at this point, I'm really starting to get very, very stressed. I go through, first of all, security, obviously, and then I meet the protocol officer. The protocol officer starts telling me, Mr. Randall, make sure that you address the president like this. Don't say that. We recommend you don't do this, and above all, make sure you do that. I have no idea what he said because I was so concentrated on this interview. This really was the last thing I wanted to hear. Then I meet the press officer. The press officer was very friendly, but then mentioned that he was very grateful for us having sent the questions that we would be asking in this interview in advance. I didn't know what he was talking about. I hadn't seen those questions. They had been sent whilst I was on the plane from London. My God, now I was really worried, almost panicking. Have you ever had one of those feelings, that sensation where you would give anything to get that horrible thing that you have to face over and done with? I remember walking down the corridors of the presidential palace with this press officer. And as we're walking, I could feel the sweat building and building underneath my arms, going through my shirt and penetrating the jacket that I was wearing. Do I lift my arms up to let them breathe and hope that this sweat patch dries out, or do I just keep it down and try and hide the ever-growing puddle of sweat? We sit down on a bench outside the doors of the president's office now. I'm sitting down on one side with my briefcase. The press officer is on the other. I can't remember what we were talking about, but I seem to remember it was football. But I was just fixed on the door. Eventually, the doors slowly open, and I see President Fujimori sitting at the end of a long table, and he was having his dinner, which I thought was really odd. Why would you want me to come in now when you're having your dinner, I thought. But it was 8 o'clock. I guess it was fairly late. I didn't have much time to dwell on this because the president made a little gesture like this. It was time. It was time for me to go in. So I picked up my briefcase. This was it. This was the moment. And I took a step towards the president's office. And it was at that very moment that the press officer stopped me. Mr. Randall, he says, Aren't you forgetting something?